Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that we started so that it could be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I get the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Now, those of you who are regular listeners know all about Craig, but if this is your first time, Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors, and a really nice guy who I have fun hosting the show with. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. 3 years. We're coming up on 3 years. Isn't that hard to believe?
You know, we have talked to a lot of people and shared a lot of information with the society, with the members of the Digital Enterprise Society and many others who just stumble upon the podcast. Do you have any favorite episodes, Craig?
Oh, I don't know. The first time we ran across somebody who knew what theory of constraints was, that got me all excited. And that poor guy was just, you'll appreciate, our guests will appreciate this. That was with Western Digital of all people. So that's one that sticks in my mind only because we didn't know each other, and yet by the time we were done, we were getting all kinds of feedback, and we got feedback from the audience about the theory of constraints. And here are these two guys from completely different industries who are talking about why it's so important you go read the book. So that was a memorable one.
You know, and I think it's interesting because I think that was one of the episodes where then you sent me a book to read afterwards. Those are always my favorite, where you're like, here's some homework for you, Thom.
And so, you know, that was a good one. And then every now and then I like to find a guest that has demonstrated what I think is one of the most important things, which is collaborating across industries. And the guest we have today, I've known him for a long time, both at my former job at General Motors and then in my past engagements here these last couple of years. And so it'll be interesting to chat with Brett and have a talk about why partnerships are so important.
Well, today, like all of our episodes, Craig and I work really hard to bring to those of you who are listening to this podcast, we want to bring interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help everybody enhance and grow their careers. And today we're joined by Brett Hillhouse. Now, he is the global industrial leader for automotive at IBM. And what he is he's responsible for the automotive industry business for the AI applications division. Now, he reports to sales, but really his job is all about strategy. He works on the product side, the marketing side, how they interact with customers, and everything else in between, sort of all aspects of what they do. And what he's done is he's sort of designed his career, his role, around the things he really likes to do, which is something we talk about a lot on the show, is how do you design a career that's going to get you out of bed in the morning and keep you excited? And so I'm really excited to introduce all of you to Brett Hillhouse. Hey, Brett, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Thom. Appreciate it.
So, Brett, give us a little bit of your background. How did you get started in this business world, and what led you to where you are today?
Well, I'm kind of a fake engineer. I've got the degree in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, but I've always been in, consulting and sales roles in the different organizations I've been part of. And, go ahead, Craig.
Well, no, that's fine, Brett. I just learned something. I learned I'm now a fake engineer. I get it. Okay, this is good. See, Thom, I really did retire from engineering. I'm actually a fake engineer, okay? So this is good insight.
And I'm a fake podcast host, but here we are.
Okay. Anyway, so what you doing now, Brett? Where did you end up? And why don't you start with how you and I met a few weeks ago? Yes, face to face, believe it or not, during the pandemic.
First travel I've done on a plane, and the first travel I've done for going to a conference, and obviously since the start of COVID. So it was actually it was fabulous to get out and see people again and see friends again. And yeah, that was excellent. We were up in Traverse City, which is a lovely place.
Yeah, and here in Michigan, there's an annual conference that the car guys all go to. That's why Brett was there. That's why I went there, and it was refreshing to meet people I hadn't seen in a couple of years, and then to meet people I talk to every week, but we haven't met in 18 months, thanks to the pandemic. So another a good acquaintance of both Brett and I. He was there as well, so that was a lot of fun. And then there were automotive retirees like myself that showed up at the conference. So one was at the University of Michigan, another one was at a battery maker, and it's just kind of interesting. And what's really sad, everybody, the host of the conference, I know her husband as well. I knew, so we got to chatting at a break. If they had held it a week later, they would have canceled it. Yeah. It's just the nature of where we are, everybody. The pandemic is what it is, and you got to manage the risk. And for a moment, Brett, we could see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I know.
At the moment, I think it's gotten dim again.
Yeah, most of my clients have gone back to virtual, and I did have one meeting last week with a client face to face, and the first client dinner I've had since COVID started, which was kind of shocking. But yeah, most of them aren't even allowing that. So
Brett, you and I first met a long time ago. I don't remember how long ago, but it was more around these tools that we use to develop embedded software. Right. And at the time, IBM had bought this smaller company, Rational, or it was somewhere around there. And you and I and the team at General Motors, we were talking about how IBM was going to help with various things. And so you've seen a lot happen in the last decade. I was curious for your perspective on this question about where's the value in a car in the future? Is the value in the software, or is the value in the battery, or is the value in it just works? I mean, what's your perspective of this? And everybody listen closely, because Brett's got interesting insights that maybe the rest of us don't get. So I'm curious, where do you think the value in cars is going?
I mean, it's clearly going to be in the software, and the software is really defining the vehicle of the future. So while the battery is certainly important, I mean, you're spot on that, or the fuel cell, whatever it might be from a sustainable vehicle perspective, you're going to have this real need for software experiences and really delighting the customer through the software, and including things like range anxiety and really understanding and personalization for that driver and what they expect, from a vehicle, and what they expect from being able to, find charging stations, know the night before that, hey, the weather's bad, it's probably going to reduce your range. You better go plug your car in right now because you don't have it plugged in the garage. Simple things like that on your app and stuff are things that are going to differentiate the brand.
That's interesting, yeah. And then if there happens to be a warning about overheating, well, park it outside when you plug it in. But that's a whole other embarrassing thing going on in the industry at the moment. Sure. Now, the topic that spurred me to reach out to you or think about it, I actually reached out to you back at the conference in August, but the inspiration was you guys at IBM and the folks at Siemens made an announcement at a completely different conference, which used to be physical, that you and I have gone to for years, and now it was virtual at this Process Insights conference. And I wanted you to summarize, how did this collaboration between Mentor Graphics, which is now owned by Siemens, and IBM occur for exchanging of data, and maybe describe a little bit of how that exchange works? So,
yeah, it goes back to the relationships I kind of built when I first was meeting you guys at GM, right? And getting involved with that entire team. I was speaking at some of their conferences. We were talking about sharing data. We had a number of projects with Mentor Graphics at the time where we were doing some joint development work together, specifically as one-offs for a client. Lots of discussions about partnership at the time, but it never, it was always a one-off that we used to do. What's changed here and has really gotten everybody excited, both on the old Mentor Graphics side, or what's now Siemens Capital side, as well as the whole rest of the Siemens DIS team, which is their software organization, is that it's coming from a tops-down perspective now. So our my general manager and their president are essentially the two main sponsors of this, and it actually puts some, some weight behind the arrow here. We're actually getting things done because somebody's got to make the hard decisions about, what is your priority? Is it working together with another partner, or is it getting your backlog of your own products that you want to get out the door done first? So somebody's got to help with that, and it's not going to happen naturally, is what I've seen, and without having that tops-down approach as well.
Yeah, so that's a lesson for the listeners. So when you have a reason to make a partnership across what might be even a competitive boundary at times, you really got to get the senior leadership involved. And Tony Hemmelgarn at Siemens, I know pretty well, and I'm glad he's one of the sponsors. I don't know your executive, but that's okay. What I think is really important is the catalyst, right? The willingness to do it. What I ran into in sales guys at different companies, not just the two we're talking about today, is the sales guys would often be a deterrent, right? Why do I want to be a partner with IBM's requirements management tools when I got my own? Well, because your own isn't that good, and there's a better one over there. So the sales guy is the wrong guy to be the catalyst, right? And you're unique, Brett, in the description of your role, because you're willing to take the strategic view and not be so much worried about, well, I got a tool that does X, Y, Z, so why would I encourage a partnership with a competitor, right? So right. Is there something that what is it in your DNA that makes you aware that the strategy is that important? I mean, there's something, you're unique. I haven't found many people like you. How is it that? What is it?
I think it comes down to our joint friend Bill on some of this. Just, Bill said, hey, you're not trying to sell me something. Remember back then, he said, you're just trying to help me. And that's honestly my approach. I want to help the client. And what we find is that there are a lot of folks who have, joint solution from us and from Siemens, and yet we're not working together. We're not making them work. We act like we're complete competitors in some days, even though in most cases we're not. So it's the next deal on the table.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I don't know how many sales guys we have that listen to the call. Probably none. But but the engineers that are that are listening, they really do appreciate what you just said, because we get paid to think about the bigger puzzle, and not just the value to the customer, but also making, well, I guess that's a value, making reliable products for the customer. And so, interesting. I know your focus is automotive, but you're also well aware of all of the AI offerings that IBM has, and where you may be going with all that. Are there industries taking advantage of this kind of partnership that you and Siemens are pursuing? In other words, are they taking advantage of technology, or are they identifying other opportunities? And I'm kind of curious of the adoption. Do others see it, or is it just
I think others are seeing this? In fact, I'm mainly mentioned the engineering side of this relationship with Siemens right now, but it's broader than that. It cuts across our manufacturing portfolio and really the service lifecycle management side that Siemens brings. We're very strong on the shop floor with regards to some of our maintenance software and the whole move to zero defects, for instance, which is using an AI for visual inspectability that we have that's very unique in the industry. Red Hat from a virtualization perspective as well. Being able to help the rest of the Siemens brand take advantage of that and make deployments a heck of a lot easier. We're basically going through the exact same transformation with our products too. So it's really, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing that is helping with the rollout of AI, Craig, is that we're trying to make it into an appliance. It's not the data scientist that has to use it. We're trying to make it an application such that the engineer just uses. So minimal setup, the technician on the shop floor can use it, can set up his own profiles, can set up his own models very quickly and easily, very streamlined user interface, instead of it being a cryptic thing of picking the algorithms and trying out about 20 different ways to try and tweak your model. We got a very very strong focus on streamlining the heck out of all that stuff.
Well, and you need that experimentation and research, if you will, research into the research, right, of how well it will apply. But you're right. Once it gets to a certain level of maturity, it needs to be an appliance in order to be broadly adopted. And it should be adopted because the machinery, the computers, and then the software that help run it all have become a commodity, right? It's just amazing to me how inexpensive computers are compared to, well, you and I are close to the same age. I'm a little older, but can you just look at what's happened in 40 years, right? I mean, I was a cool kid on campus because I used the big mainframe and I carried around cards, right? I'm sure you probably didn't do that. You're probably younger. But
I had one time we had to use cards. Yeah.
just once, right?
Yeah.
But my point is, now we got more power in our phone, our handheld device than we could ever imagine. And everything is Internet of Things now, right? Everything's sensing everything, which gives you a cool insight into usage patterns. And by cool, I mean the ability to make the products better, right? Well, that's where AI comes in, is being able to help you manage that pile of insight in order to be able to make a better product. So interesting. What advice would you have to other solution vendors? There's more than just you and Siemens that should partner more. I mean, is there a key to your success?
I think part of it is definitely cultural elements of this. I would find it harder to partner with certain other organizations out there and have. And as you know, I mean, kind of my background, I've been in the PLM industry for a long time. I used to work for SDRC. I ran Dassault's Innovia business in the Americas for several years. So I'm very familiar with the leadership all over the place in the PLM industry. Used to work, with Heppelman and stuff from the PTC side of things as well. Yeah. So, very familiar with these guys. And I do think the cultural element is really important, and the cultures need to match, and there needs to be some trust. I mean, one of the things we worked through early on in this partnership is how the heck should our teams behave, and how do we manage that? Because there are going to be times when, one side's going to say the other isn't acting in good faith, and you've got to be able to manage that. You've got to have the escalation paths. And, so far we haven't seen one go all the way up to the Tony and the Kareem on Youssef on our side. But, it's there in case it's needed.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's good insight, everybody. Make sure the cultures combine. They don't have to be identical, but they have to be compatible. And if they're not, then that might be an early sign it ain't going to work. And okay, interesting. Now flip it the other way. So customers of your partnership of what you've developed, what should they expect? I mean, I'm one example of a customer who said, "Gosh darn it, I want this." Right? By the way, everybody, we were talking about something called OSLC. There's a couple other podcasts on that. Let's not worry about defining that today. But the data interchange between your two tool solution sets, customers can draw pictures and say, "Hey, I want these things to interact," but they don't really go further than that. So what's your advice to customers?
Yeah, the first one is you got to get out of the habit of saying this technology needs to be integrated with this piece of technology. That makes no sense to me, right? There's no value in just connecting two systems that don't have a use case that add value and have users on both sides that get value from it. So everything should be very use case driven. I do think standards like OSLC are extremely important. And, there's a huge community of people out there. I don't know everybody anymore who integrates to our solution because it's an open standard. Anybody can do it, and they do. And, I have clients telling me about products that are integrated into my suite, and I had no idea.
So it's interesting that, I like the way you said that. To those people out there who want to combine technology stacks, tool stacks, there's a good chance they're just the IT guy, or worse, the consultant.
You said that, not me, bud.
Yeah, that's fair. And so then the question is, if you're not getting to real use cases, and that's a really good point, Brett. If you're not getting to really good use cases, understandable use cases that require the connection, right, or the bridging, or however the mechanism is going to work, then maybe that's not the right partnership. And so that's customers probably need some coaching there. I'm frustrated in the PLM industry, not with the solution providers, but the sort of the bad habits people have gotten into, whether it's a IT technology bad habit or even the bad habits of management saying, well, I've got to do it my way because my way is the best way. And they don't open their minds up to, there's somebody using the complete tool set from IBM or Siemens. And by the way, they're faster, right? So this unwillingness to keep your mind open and be aware of what's going on is another weakness, I think. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And I think the other one, Craig, that I'll hit on is there's got to be value on both sides. And so one thing that we did was craft some general guidelines for us. And what are some key operating ideas that we want to do and make sure all of our teams that are working on these integrations have in mind. And one of those is there's got to be value for both teams. And that doesn't mean typically that there's going to be a one-way data transfer. That we want to create a full digital thread that goes in both directions. I have software users, I have systems engineers on our side, and they're much stronger on the Siemens side in the mechanical and other in electrical areas. So really what I want to do is if some of our requirements, for instance, or models are going to be used downstream in mechanical, I want to understand where those are, or at least the links. I don't have to have full visibility to it, but the engineers need to understand what an impact is if we make a change to this model in the future, or we make a change to this requirement. What are all the things downstream that are going to need to be touched to make sure that it didn't break something? And I don't think everybody gets that at first. That I think in PLM you often had this thing; it all goes into one place, and that's the only thing that matters, right? And that's not true.
Well, and a lot of PLM came from manufacturing becoming digital, and then they wanted engineering to provide them digital artifacts, at least a model of the thing they had to, make or bend or mill or whatever. And so while that was really important for the start of all of this computer-aided everything, what we do now, from embedded software bringing new features to whatever the Internet of Things, collecting data in real time. I mean, I'm fascinated with the idea of product upgrades based upon customer behavior, right?
Yeah.
And this has been going on in phones forever, or not forever, for the last 5 years, but it seems like forever. But the ability to do that in a car is just phenomenally interesting, because the car guys have been studying markets for a long time. They got the market research stuff down, but it takes them months or years because they do clinics and then and all that. The fact that they can now do market assessments in hours or days based upon usage pattern in a particular city is just fascinating to think about what the implications of that'll be, right? And I don't think that would be possible if the mechanical engineering people weren't provisioning places in the car for whatever the current generation of electronics. I firmly believe we're going to be soon at an era where we'll be upgrading electronics annually or biannually in a car, just so we can take advantage of the next set of features, right?
And it's funny because it's also, you got to go look at the Tesla model again all over again, because they were the first ones really doing that in the automotive industry. But everybody's having this discussion. I was with the head of R&D for a major OEM on Friday for 3 hours, and with his direct staff. And part of the conversation is, what is the hardware that's got to go into the vehicle in order to upgrade that vehicle at a later date? And that's a hard discussion to get into, right? I mean, everybody knows you want to reduce your cost, but why the heck shouldn't you have a switch for that's going to support auto up and down for the rear windows, instead of it just being in the front two, when maybe the next owner of that vehicle will want that feature and will pay for it, right? And that's a real simple example, but think of every other feature you can turn on.
Yeah, and so the guys at Capital and the guys at IBM, you guys are aware of this phenomena. The trouble with a lot of manufacturing guys is the computer-aided tools were used to streamline manufacturing, right? How do we make a million things efficiently with repeatability so we can measure quality? There's just a bunch of mindsets that fell into place using computers to improve mass production. Great, but now how do you improve the service life, right? The application life to your point, the flexibility of the platform to allow the car to be configured for a different user, right? Because it gets sold 4 times in its lifetime.
Well, this is one area you and I had a lot of discussions on in the past, which is around the idea of doing the variant management up front and really looking at reuse across all your vehicles so that you have stuff in common that you can turn on. And too few OEMs take that seriously. They're not designing with reuse in mind, which means having all the variants laid out in there so that a simple calibration setting or something can change it. And we're taking that at the next level, which is next generation of vehicles are going to have a lot more IT technology in them. So things like containerization is part of the future of these vehicles. And containers give me this idea of being able to swap in and out components of software that can upgrade that very, very easily. So the OTA, the over-the-air updates, is much, much simpler in the future as we get into that. Today, it's really quite difficult to do, and especially in the Autosar classic architecture that we have in most vehicles today.
And for you mechanical guys, Autosar is just a standard that lets us have interchangeable parts, or at least that's the idea. And it's not quite as good as it is in some parts of mechanical engineering, frankly.
Nope.
But it'll get there. It's like all engineering disciplines; they mature over time. So Brett, it's wonderful chatting with you. I appreciate you being on the show. But I have a couple other quick questions for you.
Sure.
How's the pandemic and remote working hurt you, if at all?
It's harder in Asia just because of the time zones. I mean, it's a lot more difficult. I have done calls at 2 to 3 in the morning and stuff like that, but it is a lot harder for me to keep the pulse of the industry in Japan and China especially. So that's been difficult, at least for me. But otherwise, it hasn't been that horrible. My eyesight goes back and forth all the time. I don't know what that's all about. But that's staring at a screen all day. I'm sure a lot of us have that same experience, but yeah, it hasn't been all that different.
Yeah, and for everybody listening, Brett, you've been working out of your home office for a long time. It didn't start 2 years ago, right? So
no, I used to say my home office was on a plane, which was true, and nowadays it is the home office.
Yeah. So look into your future crystal ball and give us your prediction. What do you hope customers will do with the solutions you've partnered with other companies like Siemens and IBM? What do you hope they do with it?
I hope they find just great efficiencies out of it, that it saves them on development time, and it helps cut out a lot of the costs that are associated and overhead that are associated with engineering today. And especially with all the changes coming with sustainable vehicles and new generations of architecture and technology going into the vehicle. I mean, the head of research at this OEM, he looked at me, he goes, people are asking me all the time and have been for the last 5 years, what's the most challenging moment you've had in automotive? And it's always the current one. and it's true.
That's true. Which, by the way, must make it a fun business to be in. So all you guys that are out there that are looking for more fun, join the car companies, any of them. It's going to be a blast. It's only going to get better. And the pandemic is just a hiccup along the way. The fact that we have all this electronics in the car, it's going to enable all kinds of other stuff. So with that, thanks, Brett. It's been great catching up. And Thom, back to you.
Great, thanks. And Brett, I wanted to follow up on something that I said in the introduction, because before we got started, we talked about the way you sort of had designed your role around the things that you like to do. And when I always listen to what our guests say, and I always try to come up and try to close with some sort of career advice for our listeners. So if somebody was intrigued by that and they heard sort of the eclectic background and all the different things you do, what advice do you have for somebody who wants to sort of create their own role within a company? How can people go about doing that?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to have some self-awareness that, what is more important to you than maybe just moving up the chain? Because, I used to think that was all I wanted to do, and I found that wasn't that much fun. So, finding being self-aware about what you want to do in your career is good. And then when you want to create it, you got to just create value and, have real expertise in what you do and respect from, the people you work with. Because frankly, if they want to work with you, you're going to be the guy in that role.
And is this something that people can start to do sort of younger in their career, sort of earlier along the way? Or is this something that comes once you've established a reputation that then you get to call your shots a little bit more?
I think you gotta establish yourself a bit in the first place. So get some nice success under your belt that, hey, I accomplished X, Y, and Z. It's pretty extraordinary. And, my next role, then you can start to kind of tweak what the job role is versus what you want it to be.
Awesome. Well, Brett, again, like Craig said, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Please make sure that you join us next week because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. And remember this, the Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.